Hi, this is Tina.
And this is Erika.
And we are A92A. A92A stands for ages 9 to adult. That's how long we've been on this journey together as friends.
92 is also our high school graduation year.
And ages 9 to adult is a nod to the board game life, which we rockified as kids in order to live out our rock and roll fantasies. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We have a very special guest today. You know him as the founding guitarist and songwriter of the Bulletboys, but also for his work with King Cobra and newer project, The Hot Summers. Please welcome Mick Sweda.
Yay!
Hi, guys.
Hey, thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Very cool. Mick, we were actually connected because you sat on a plane next to a friend of mine and started chatting, and he actually connected us. Yeah.
That's right. I totally forgot about that. Yeah, he was a really nice guy.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Cool.
It's lucky. Small world.
Yeah. Fortuitous.
Yeah.
Well, Mick, we have so many questions for you, so we're just going to jump right into it. Let's talk for a minute, because obviously what we do here on A92A is talk a lot about 80s metal. It's our favorite genre and sort of what we're experts on. But you, Lonnie, and Mark were all part of King Cobra. If we're talking about Bulletboys and kind of how you got that start, why did you make the decision when you were part of King Cobra at that time to leave the band and start something new?
Well, everything had pretty much stagnated at that point. I think we're in between labels, and I recognized that Carmine was searching for answers, and they didn't seem to be coming. We cut a couple of tracks from, I think he got involved with Gene Simmons, and he was giving us tracks, and I was presenting music, and it wasn't really, being received. And then I think the kicker was that he actually went off to do something with one of his other bands. It might have been Vanilla Fudge. I honestly, I didn't even remember it. Somebody reminded me of that. And I thought at that point, like, yeah, okay, I guess the focus isn't really on making this succeed. And I was getting restless anyway. And so it just made sense for me to say, look, I'm going to take off and start my own thing. And Mark and Lonnie, if you guys want to come with me, that would be great. And they both felt like that was a situation that they'd been working toward. And I don't blame them. I mean, Carmine was how do we like to say it? The penultimate drummer. So they decided to stay. And then I don't know what went on after that, but eventually they gave me a call and we got together, and that's how Bulletboys started.
Yeah, I remember reading that in an interview that you had done, that there was some hesitation on the part of Lonnie and Mark to leave because they felt like they had just gotten there, like we just started and we really want to see what happens with this opportunity. And so they hesitated a little bit, but lucky for all of us Bulletboys fans, the jump.
And they can't be blamed. I don't fault them for that at all. But I certainly wasn't looking forward to the audition process. So I'm glad they finally jumped aboard.
Yeah.
So tell us about those early days with Bulletboys. You guys really, you hit the ball out of the park with your first single, Smooth Up In Ya, and just took off from there. Like, what do you remember about that time? What was it like suddenly seeing yourself on MTV and going on big tours?
Well, what stands out for me is the period leading up to that in 1987. It was a very sort of dark period, financially for all of us. And because that's all we did. None of us had any jobs. I was commuting from a long way away into LA every day to try to make this happen. So we were, by the time all that happened, we were on our last legs, and everybody was broke and hungry and not, the thing that kept us together was the band was getting together and playing and knowing that we had some strong material and knowing that we had a really cool thing going. So it all seemed to make sense. And I can understand why a lot of other bands in that same situation might say, you know what, I can't do this anymore. I'm getting a job. I'm out of here. And because we were all very close to that point. So when things started to happen, it was less maybe jubilation and more relief.
Right. Did you ever have a backup plan? Like, did you ever think, okay, if this doesn't work for me, this is what I'll do with my life?
Yes. My backup plan was to be an 1812 war reenactor.
Oh, cool.
Really?
No. I'm just kidding. There's probably just as much money in that as in rock and roll at that point. So what could I lose? No, I had a background in theater, but I wasn't really interested in doing that. I mean, I'd done some headshots before and considered it, but rock and roll was my thing and it was my baby, and that's really what I wanted to do. So who knows how it would have turned out, but I definitely would have stayed on that path.
Well, and competition was brutal back then. You know, when you really read a lot or watch any of the documentaries about that time, I mean, there was a lot of competition out there. Everyone, it seemed, had a band and was really trying to make it big. So it must have been brutal.
It was obvious by just going out to the Rainbow. And as I've said before, we weren't one of those bands that were out there flyering because we didn't really play a lot of shows. I mean, we spent a lot of our time in the studio woodshedding, and even though we'd all go out and see all these bands, I specifically remember seeing Tammy Down every night, just handing out flyers and thinking, wow, I couldn't imagine being out here doing this because we had a lot of work to do. We didn't really have time for that, frankly. So again, it was pretty fortuitous, that everything came together the way it did, and we were able to, I don't know, be seen somehow out of that milieu of bands, as you say.
How did that happen?
Well,
what was your
we were out on the Strip, and I happened to run into a guy who had been doing the merchandising for King Cobra. And we had struck up a conversation, and he said, yeah, I'm getting into management now, so if you ever have anything good, let me know, give me a call. And ultimately that's what I did. And he came to a rehearsal, and I think he believed in us right from the get-go. And that was when everything started to happen. He had connections and sort of knew his way around and how to navigate, the beginning stages of this thing. And it just sort of snowballed from there.
It's so great to hear every band's origin story because, you mentioned the flyering. We did a whole episode on self-promotion on the Sunset Strip, and, you guys took a different approach. You were like, let's just get to work and write and play and practice and get better. But luckily you had a good connection that got you, where you guys were, and you guys really blew up pretty hard and fast. It was super cool to watch. We were big fans back in the day.
Well, thank you. And a lot of that has to be credited to a street team, because once we got to the point where we were connected to a label and everything was stabilized in that regard, that's just the beginning. It's just like when people say that they signed a record deal, like, oh my God, yeah, we made it. Well, no, you didn't, because there's a lot of great records that are just sitting on a shelf that no one will ever hear. So we had a street team and people helping us to still get our name out there and our music out there. So it really, there's a lot of people involved and a lot of effort. And I couldn't imagine having enough gratitude to, give to all those people, because it really was a team effort.
Yeah.
The music industry has changed too so significantly over the years. What do you remember about that time in the late 80s versus you've been in the music business for a long time, still making music, still writing music? What do you see in terms of like the most recognizable changes that have happened?
Well, from a personal perspective, it's the for lack of a better word, the DIY ethos that has emerged from all of that. Because back then, as a musician, you have a manager and you have an agent and you have a publicist and you have an engineer and you have a second engineer and a producer, and then you have a mixer, and then you have a master, someone who masters the record. So those were all different disciplines, and they were all unique and not sort of, well, they all work together, I should say, but they were all definitely something that you didn't participate in. So as a musician, having to virtually do almost all of those things myself, I recognize now the value that all those people had, and the work that goes into it, like this Hot Summers record we just finished. I mean, it was a lesson. Not that I didn't know it was coming, and not that I didn't understand or appreciate or enjoy doing any of it, but it's almost bittersweet for me to recognize that a lot of those disciplines have gone away and people have had to do things themselves. And I don't know how much or what kind of an effect that has on music of today. But I'm sure a lot of those people would say, yeah, they definitely miss us.
Yeah, I think that's with the technology just in general. You know, there are so many ways that you can do these things for yourself, but you have to figure it out. You know, it's like it's a learning process. It's not like it just comes like this. And certainly, like you said, there were so many people that were so good and talented at what they did in the music business, and even like the record labels and how significantly that's changed. I mean, you know, it's just a very different business now than it was.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. And I'm sure a lot of those people, you know, especially the most talented ones, have moved on to do other things. But I do miss the days when you could just hand off your tapes to somebody to mix, you know, tapes. That's how far back I go.
Us too.
Yes. Well, you know, Tina and I, we did an episode not long ago, and I can't even remember what the topic was, but we were talking about the fact that our generation really missed out on the whole vinyl movement because, you know, vinyl happened before us. You know, we graduated from high school in 92. Vinyl kind of happened before us. By the time we were buying and consuming music, it was all cassette tapes. Yeah. And then now vinyl's kind of making a comeback. But, you know, I mean, we really grew up on the cassette tape era. And, you know, so we missed out on a lot of that.
Well, that's one of the things that we wanted to try to revive in whatever way we could with the Hot Summers record, because we have a deep respect for vinyl too, Shane and I. And to me, when you're playing music and you can see the speakers pumping and they're actually moving, if you'll notice, a CD would never do that to your speakers, whereas vinyl will. In addition to the fact that you can sit there and look at a gatefold and look at all, you know, just pour over the liner notes as you're listening to it from start to finish, which is another element of music I don't think happens very often anymore. Yeah, it's when you say missed out, I totally get it, because as a kid, that's where I spent my time. I didn't necessarily listen to music so much as I researched it and studied it.
Yeah.
And those LPs definitely went a long way to helping me do that.
Well, you're talking even about the liner notes, and we were talking about how, like, I couldn't even read it. I'd have to get my readers out, like, because we were having cassette tapes, you know, where it's like all this like little writing and little print. Yeah, it was not the same. Absolutely.
Well, good for you for getting just the readers out, because I have to get a microscope and a bright freaking light in order to see any of that stuff. But I still do. I love to read it. You know, it still makes a big deal to me.
It is.
Yeah.
So we were obviously huge Bulletboys fans. Much has been publicized about your 2022 breakup earlier this year. So kind of regardless of what your relationship is like today, how do you feel about your time with the Bulletboys and the experiences you shared with those guys? What's it mean to you now?
Well, it's very, again, bittersweet, because that was my baby, you know, that was my life. And I really was hoping that we could have gone further, longer, and better. And so it's tough to say I'm disappointed, because there's a lot that I'm proud of. But ultimately, yeah, I feel like we underachieved. And we could have done things a lot differently and gone a lot further. And I have to reconcile those. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, and, you know, people have let me know this, like, dude, you did a lot of things that most other people haven't done. And I appreciate that. But I also am personally sort of embedded in that situation. So I have a bit of a different outlook. So I balance disappointment with, you know, satisfaction at what we did.
Absolutely.
You've had a really long, you know, career since that time. Anyway, you know, your website mentions your restlessness and your drive. Have you always been like that? Like always kind of looking forward, wanting to do more, taking action?
Yeah. I do get bored too easily, perhaps. But that's the wonderful thing about music. If you find that you're stuck stylistically, or you see another area that you want to discover, you can do that within a band. You can do that within an album, as far as I'm concerned. And that's what I appreciate. Again, going back to the vinyl, that's what I appreciated about the music that I listened to when I was a kid. You know, whether it was the Abbey Road record, you know, stylistically, you can find pretty much everything on there. You know, the Let It Be record was something that, again, I studied as a kid, and Led Zeppelin, obviously. So within even what you might call a strict format, or what somebody might label as a strict format, I've always felt like you could satisfy those urges to search and explore.
Sure. So I want to go back to the Hot Summers project you've mentioned a couple of times. I actually listened to it this morning while I was getting ready to come here, and I love it. I think it's a great record.
Thank you.
How did that project come about, and what was that experience like, you know, recording that?
Well, many years ago, Jimmy and I decided that we were going to try to work together, and because we've always had a great symbiosis. I love the way he plays, and we started to get together and work on some songs. And that process went on for quite a while, until ultimately we said, look, we it's hard to write without having a voice in mind. It's hard to put music together if you don't have a vision of ultimately where it's going to go. So we just put an ad out for a singer, and Shane came along, and it didn't take long in that very first meeting for us to recognize that we had a lot in common. And so Shane entered the process, and we had some difficulties and some conflicts, and Jimmy had a different vision of where he wanted to go. And so over the course of the years, sort of stopping and going, and we ultimately, Shane and I got back together, sort of resurrected the material and finished it. So I guess what I'm trying to say in a very long-handed way is that over the course of, I don't know, it's probably been 8 years now, the material still had sort of a cohesive feel. And even though it was recorded at different times and under different circumstances, we found a way to make it work. And I think that's what I'm most proud of, because it really was a labor of love and took a lot of effort, but ultimately we are happy with how it came out.
Yeah.
It's an amazing project. And you've just continually, like I said, regardless of what your current state is, whether you're with a band, not with a band, it sounds like you are one that is just constantly creating, constantly writing music, constantly in the studio. You really enjoy that process and like to be in the studio working. What do you feel really fuels your creativity? What is that? Do you have any specific motivators? What is it that kind of drives you creatively now?
Well, I don't know that I can describe it. I do know that when I'm not creating, when for whatever reason, if I'm too busy, if something's happening in my life that I'm not able to create, there is a definite longing, and it probably goes further than that. Maybe it's even a burning. So I can't tell you what that is, but there's, I think, a fire within me that it will never be put out. And if I'm unable to allow that fire to breathe, I get very stultified, I think. So I wish I could describe it better for you, but as I've said before, I think it's just in you. And yeah. I know there are other people that understand what I'm saying. It's not something that is tangible. It's just something that exists, and as you said, just drives you.
What do you feel like you write about now versus what you might have written about 20, 30 years ago? What inspires you?
Well, I don't limit it. Like I used to say, I remember saying when I was younger, I could be inspired by a car accident, but I love history. I'm an avid reader. So I like to interject historical things into, like, for example, the song, A Single Heart, the last song on the Hot Summers CD. I tried to coalesce the westward expansion of the United States, when they came out of the woods and went to the plains of Texas and confronted the Comanche Nation. I love the idea of that conflict being associated with a love affair, unrequited love affair. So I know that sounds very esoteric, but that's the kind of thing that might influence me in my writing.
That's amazing.
That's super cool. And then you actually also had a podcast yourself. Did you not?
Yeah, I did. And I envy you guys for continuing. It took a lot of time, and as much fun as it was, and as much as I'd love to go back to doing it, there's just not enough time in a day for me.
Yeah. I see.
You interviewed one of my favorite bands a while back, R5. I loved those guys. I thought they were great. And I actually took my son to one of their concerts because he used to watch Ross Lynch on Austin and Ally on the Disney Channel and was a big fan of that show. And so I took him to an R5 show. I actually booked them at a venue, and they were great. I thought they were great. Are they doing anything anymore? I haven't heard much from them.
I wondered about that the other day. I haven't heard anything either. I know Ross went out and did a movie that I think was really cool. I think he went a little out of his box for that. Yeah. But those guys were all very sweet, and we had a great time. And that came about because my friend Craig, who did the podcast with me, was playing hockey with them, and they're great hockey players from what I understand. I haven't had a chance to play with them, but I hope those guys are doing great. They're really nice, and they deserve all the rewards they get.
Mick, you're coming to us from what looks like your home studio. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, I call it Red Cake Digital.
Oh, very cool. I think I read somewhere that you feel the most comfortable, in the studio. That's where you do your best work. That's where you're happiest. Is that true? Is that still true? And is that where you spent most of your time during, the COVID lockdown? And, what does your studio mean to you?
Yeah, I remember back even when in the Bulletboys days, when tours were coming up and we had to go out and do dates, I always felt like I would rather have just stayed home and created. So as much as I love being on the road and playing for people, this is where I'm most comfortable. Although you might not get that from some of the expletives you hear coming out of here, because it can, as much fun as it is, it can also be very demanding and frustrating for somebody who's, as much as I hate the word, trying to be a perfectionist. So yeah, this, again, long answer. It's this is where I love to be.
Cool. And also we talked a little bit before we started recording that you and I are neighbors, almost neighbors. We live near each other.
Yeah.
What keeps you in Southern California when so many other people have moved out of state?
I don't have a clue. I don't know.
Fair.
I sometimes wish I were in Switzerland. Sometimes I wish I was back in Buffalo. But I love California. My little guy, Easton, he's got a role on General Hospital that he really loves, and we're really proud of him for doing that.
That's so cool.
So if for no other reason, it'd be that. As long as he wants to pursue his acting career, we'll be here.
And he's how old now?
He's 11.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I can imagine that you have a lot of fun being a parent. How do you spend your days?
Well, my days are spent playing what we call town, where we have a lot of little characters, and they all have individual lives and more drama than I am accustomed to, but it's all very fun. So we do that. We go for our walks, and I try to spend as much time with my family as I possibly can. But I also love to be here in my studio. So I'm going to be off to Hot Summer's rehearsal in a little bit after this. So
nice.
That's it.
What is next for you? Because you obviously have a lot of projects. You're working with the Hot Summers. What is next for you?
Well, we feel like we have just started getting the Hot Summers off the ground and getting some legs under it. It was kind of funny because we just decided that we wanted to be released on the first day of summer, but we didn't really have any foundation, in terms of getting it out there, or even a plan. We're not we're musicians. We're not publicists. We're not marketers. We don't have the first clue about any of that. So it's something that, as we talked about earlier, we're learning on the fly. But in terms of any future projects, I listen to what a lot of people call post rock, which is basically instrumental music that has its sort of an ambient flavor, and that's something I want to pursue. Obviously, we'll be doing more Hot Summers work as well, but I love, as my restless nature would dictate, moving on and exploring other things in terms of ambient instrumental music.
Oh, that's so cool. I was actually going to ask what are you listening to these days, and what's influencing you right now. So that's really cool to hear that.
Yeah, I go to Bandcamp and I like to support bands. I mean, I'm not much of a streamer. I buy CDs still, so I'm that guy. But I love to get turned on to new music. So it's hard for me to even remember some of the names. But there's a band called Pillars, which is fantastic. I really like If These Trees Could Talk, bands like that.
Where do you find new music? Where do you find your new music?
I have, or we have programmed into, I think it's Pandora, certain channels. And one of them is oh man, I can't forget the name of this band. They're great. Of the Vine.
Okay.
And so I'll listen to an Of the Vine channel, and they're a great band as well. But then they'll play like-minded bands. And so that's where I get a lot of it. I'll just see something that strikes me, and next thing you know, I'm buying the entire catalog. So that's one of the ways I listen to new music. But
it's so different now. I mean, just even talking about how things might have been, 30 years ago versus now, it is very different in terms of how you discover new music, how you find new bands. I mean, what you just described obviously didn't exist, in the 80s, algorithms kind of introducing new bands to you through technology. So that is a pretty cool development. Where did you feel like you found new music when you were with the Bulletboys, and who did you listen to? Like when you guys were together in the 80s, who did you listen to back then?
Wow, that's a great question. I listened to a lot of my power pop influences, bands like 2020 and geez, that's such a great question. I always liked Stars, my 70s bands, but you just reminded me, like, how did you find new music back then when you're flipping through records in a record store?
Yeah.
I'm a 70s kid, so album art had a lot to do with it. If I saw an album that looked cool, it might actually be cool, and it wasn't always the case. But I listened to Scorpions a lot back then. ZZ Top, yeah, all my old standards. But I wish that I'd been able to find newer music. I wish there had been more opportunities for that.
Yeah. And you guys obviously also toured with a lot of bands. Like, does any tour stick out to you? Like, what tour was the most fun to be on? What other bands did you love touring with?
We spent a lot of time in 1989 with Cinderella and Winger. I think that was probably almost 6 months in its entirety. So that was a lot of fun. We really enjoyed going out with those guys.
We saw one of those shows, by the way.
We did. We were there.
Oh, wow.
Sioux City,
Well,
Iowa.
you guys are so young. How could you even get in?
We're not that young.
We had liberal parents.
It's funny you mentioned the album cover art, because we actually just did an episode on cover art, and one of the albums we mentioned was the Bulletboys self-titled album, because of that image of the bullet going through the apple was such a cool thing, and that kind of photography was helped developed by a Nebraskan, actually, an engineer from Nebraska. Right, yeah, so we had a little connection there we thought was super cool.
Oh, that is really cool. Yeah, those I mean, it was a striking image, and it's funny because one of the things that struck me in the early days as album art was, for whatever reason, the Batman thing wasn't big at that time, and there was somebody had done a painting of the Joker, and it was just such a striking, compelling image to me that I was really fighting for that. Like, let's put the Joker on our album, and I'm so glad that didn't happen at this point. But that's where I was at. I just love the idea of something horrific, really. But that image, with the contrasting colors, the red of the apple and that beautiful blue, it just spoke to me.
Yeah.
So I love it too.
Yeah. And the font, we mentioned the font that you guys used for the Bulletboys. The band name was super cool.
Oh,
Yeah,
cool.
Great album cover.
Oh.
Well, Mick, I know you've got rehearsal to get to in a little bit, so we'll wrap up here. It just really was fantastic having you on our podcast. Thanks so much for your time and energy that you put into this. We really appreciate it.
You guys are great. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
A lot of fun.
I'll have you over to the house. We're going to do some summer barbecues and stuff. So
some hot summer barbecues. Is it the hot summer's barbecue?
It could be.
Do not threaten me with a good time.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Well, this is the part where we actually call out to our listeners and ask them to engage with us and give us some answers. We want to hear from them. Tell us your favorite Mick Sweda memories, moments. What music do you love of his? Have you checked out Hot Summers? Tell us what you think of that. You can follow us and interact with us at our website, www.a92a.life. On Instagram at A92A_life, or find us on Facebook. And until next time, keep ratting those bangs and banging those heads. Thank you so much, Mick.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, you guys.
You too.
Okay.
Bye-bye.